Since the Chinese takeover of Tibet in 1959, 1.5 million Tibetans have died as a direct result of the Chinese excursions into that country. 6,000 monasteries have been destroyed, and thousands of Tibetans have been imprisoned. In Tibet, there is no freedom of speech, religion, or press. Accounts of massacres, torture and killings, bombardments of monasteries, exterminations of whole nomadic groups are well documented here in the Tibet Museum in McLeod, Ganj, India. Journalists are banned today in Tibet, and no one seems to be talking about the 140 Tibetans who have set themselves afire in protest of these injustices. One man, Loten Naming, a singer, musician, artist, and entertainer, decided to do something. Deeply affected by the 140 self-immolations in the past 3 years, and mindful that the world is not listening to the voice of Tibet, he speaks here about a culture that is dying. I interviewed him in McLeod, Ganj, India. Here is his story. Loten, you grew up in Dharamsala?
Yes.
And then you moved to Switzerland?
Yes.
And after you were there for a while, you felt an urgent need to do something. Would you please tell us about it?
Well, when you ask me, or when you tell me that I needed to do something urgent, the reason behind why I needed to do urgent was that I assume that you know the situation in Tibet, no?
Yes.
1959, Tibet was occupied and all these things, I suppose you know. And now I live in Switzerland, and 25 years I've been living in Switzerland. I'm 52 years old. Mm-hmm. And the reason is that in the last 3 years, more than 140 Tibetans have self-immolated for their country, for their culture, for their, how do you say, for the love of the nation, for the love of their country. So around the time when I was dragging coffin, it was around the 35th self-immolation. The situation in Tibet is very bad since 1959, and now it has even become worse because the world is not really listening to the voice of Tibetans in Tibet, the suffering of Tibetans in Tibet. So until now, more than 140 Tibetans have self-immolated.
Right.
And reasons for self-immolating is that Tibetans in Tibet are asking the world to help the Tibetans because our culture is dying, our very tradition is dying, our language is dying, we don't have any freedom. So their wish to the world, the message they have to the world is that to have freedom for the Tibetan people inside Tibet and the return of His Holiness the Dalai Lama.
Right.
So around the time when I was dragging a coffin from Bern to Geneva, it was around the 35th self-immolation. So I was very desperate and I didn't know what to do, and I called many newspapers, journalists, and I asked them, please write something about these people, what they're saying, and their message, you see, the return of the Dalai Lama and the freedom for the Tibetan people inside Tibet. But many newspapers and many people said that they don't have enough information, authentic or reasonable reasons to put these in the news. So then reliable sources, because there are no journalists in Tibet. You see, Tibet is totally kind of blocked by the Chinese government, so that no journalists can go inside Tibet. So. But then you see through social media, unprofessionals, like clips of people burning themselves. And so I showed them these things also, but they said that this is just not a reliable source. And I said, look, in Tunisia or somewhere, a man just self-immolated, and the whole Arab Spring, got like really, everybody got the attention to it, and then speaking about it, and like more than 140 Tibetans have self-immolated, but more than 140 Tibetans have self-immolated, but nobody was willing to talk about it. Then I said, look, if you don't want to talk about it, then I go and talk to your people. So what I did was I made a coffin with 4 wheels, and I put all my clothes and tents and everything inside, and then I dragged the coffin from Bern to Geneva. Bern being the capital of Switzerland, and Geneva we have the United Nations, human rights offices there. So I dragged for 53 days, more than 350 kilometers, and I met thousands of people on the way. I spoke about the situation in Tibet, about the people who are self-immolating. But they said, "Wow, really? Are people self-immolating? How? What is this? Is this a suicide and all this kind of thing?" So people really didn't know about it. So as a singer, I'm a musician, you know. So as a singer, I used my music to draw the attention. I used coffin to draw the attention, and then I was singing and talking about the situation in Tibet, the message of the Tibetan people, the return of the Dalai Lama, and the freedom for the Tibetan people. So with these two messages, I dragged the coffin.
Right. Why is the Dalai Lama so important to the Tibetan people?
Because he represents the very identity of the Tibetan people. Because His Holiness the Dalai Lama, you know, he encapsulates the very culture, the very tradition, the very hope about the Tibetan people, about the future of the Tibetan people. So I think that for me, His Holiness Dalai Lama represents that.
Right. When you were dragging the coffin, many people learned things from you that they didn't know.
Yes.
What did you learn by dragging the coffin?
By dragging the coffin, I learned that for me, there are two things. Firstly, I learned about myself because I was going more, looking more inside me. While I was dragging, I was looking more inside me. And secondly, for example, I tell you a story about this. I was very, very, very fascinated. Of course, it was a very sad moment, and it was very difficult physically because, I'm not so young as before, and my coffin was very heavy, and, dragging the coffin, and, Switzerland has all these beautiful landscapes, but then it has its, slopes and, highs and, all those kind of things. But then, Switzerland, when I was dragging along the side of the, like for example in the valleys, in the villages, in the beautiful sceneries, in Switzerland has many cows and horses and beautiful animals, like cattle and horses. So when I was dragging the coffin, between the coffin and me, there was a chain. So the chain was, being also like, touching the ground, and so the chain was like making a sound, the shh, while I was dragging. So the animals, they are very sensitive about sounds and everything. Anyway, they are much even more sensitive than us human beings. They are much concerned. In fact, they are much more human than the human beings. That's what I found out. So when I was dragging and making these sounds while I was dragging, I heard and I saw, for example, there were like 3 cows, or no, not 3 cows, 3 horses, like about 500 meters away. And when they saw me, they started galloping towards me. And then, suddenly, like they were so near to me, and then started dancing. And they were like, and like, and then at that time, I really felt like, there's this, who wrote this Animal Farm? Was
George Orwell?
George Orwell's. Suddenly I remember George Orwell's Animal Farm, because then, like, I was thinking, like, these animals, were really saying, for the first time in their life, they saw a human being dragging a bullock cart rather than, the animals.
They could identify with you.
Yeah, exactly. And the cows also. The cows, like, sometimes there are like 20, 30 cows grazing, like far and wide. And suddenly, when they heard me, like, many times, like they would just come towards me and then just sniff around me and then do that kind of thing, and like really interested in what I was doing.
You were doing something that a human being is not supposed to do.
Yes. That time I was very surprised because not many humans came to see me, because like they thought, what is this vagabond doing? Dragging a coffin, and people were very afraid to come out and like associate or just feel with me. So actually the animals were doing that. So I was like, for a certain period of time, I was really being comforted by the animals rather than by the human beings.
Right. Did you ever feel you were crazy doing this?
No, not at all. Not at all. Of course, in the beginning, I thought, because it was a very desperate kind of an act, because nobody was talking about Tibet. And then I said, I'm going to do this. I'm going to make a coffin. And I went. I was in front of the Swiss government building, and I wrote to many newspapers that I'm going to do it. And I was provoking them, and not one newspaper came. And then I was looking at myself. Who would drag a coffin, along the most beautiful place? So I think, I was just really looking at myself, and I really had this self-pity on me. But then I thought, that is exactly the reflection of the Tibetan cause, because nobody's really taking care or looking at us, really concerned about us. So me as a Tibetan with a coffin in front of the Swiss government, nobody was looking at me. And as I said before, in the beginning I felt very sad, and I looked at myself and I thought, what am I doing here? Then this reflection, understanding that this is exactly the reflection of the true situation of Tibet. Then I felt myself very proud, because that's where I'm going to start and tell the world and let them know what the situation in Tibet is.
As you were dragging this coffin and reflecting about who you are and yourself, what did you discover? What is it about yourself that's different from other people that caused you to do this?
Because I believed in myself, and I believed in the cause, and I believed, when I was a little boy, I was always looking into the eyes of my parents, and I understood the suffering and the pain in them, because they crossed Himalayan mountains. They left their most beloved country, they left everything behind, and they were forced to flee their own country, and they came to India not knowing the language, culture. They came to a world so strange. So in a way, I felt them. And then also His Holiness the Dalai Lama used to tell us children that you are the future of Tibet. So all these things kind of empowered me. I made myself sure that I'm going to do something so that my parents, their wishes, I can bring it to my children, and that we come back to Tibet.
Right. A movie has been made about your journey dragging this coffin. Can you tell us a bit about the movie?
The movie is based on dragging the coffin. Then, on top of that, there are the story of the message of the self-immolators. There are very strong pictures of self-immolations in it. And then I discuss about the situation with many young Tibetans, politicians, and in the end I meet His Holiness the Dalai Lama, and I go to him and ask for his advice. How can I continue? Because the situation of Tibet is so bad that I'm just a small, like an ant, or an insect, and I feel almost powerless. And then all these things, that's what happening in Tibet, all these things happening around the world. So I thought that this is so important for me that I must, in the end, with this feeling of powerlessness, I wanted to get an answer from or advice from His Holiness the Dalai Lama.
Right. What is the movie called?
It's called Tibetan Warrior. Thank you. I need to go up.
Okay.
Thank you. See you.
Thank you very much. Yeah. Let's go.
Wait, come again?
Come down. So now I with the song of the mountains of Tibet. And then you all can go and sleep nicely and have a nice dream. Okay? Ngepa yu sesho numbares, ser sepuru di payutens. Ngepa ma ngusho kabure, ngukaburu di pamatens.